forced to live in the community. She said, I love where I'm at now. I wouldn't move, but I had no choice to live here. And she said, furthermore, the contractor who's talking had just finished saying this place has been industrial zoned for 70 years. Ms. Frederick says, well, I couldn't vote 70 years ago. You know, those who lived in this community couldn't vote, so we didn't have a lot to say on that. And I just noticed that everything you put out in historical terms was exactly what she was saying about this exact community. So, and NDQ was a big help that the contractor realized this might not be the best place to put this. And so thank you. So we're ready to go. And so everyone, we have Jackie Patterson. She's the National NAACP Director with Environmental and Climate Justice Program. And she's going to do a presentation. Jackie?
Great. So I'll keep this quick because of, obvious reasons. Thank you all for having me. It's always lovely to be back in Mississippi. And so I'm just going to share a little bit about a report that we did, the NAACP, on energy policies. And it really kind of draws on some of the things that have already been said tonight around some of the threats that we have to the environment here, whether it's coal plants or the BP oil drilling disaster, and then the results of some of the our reliance on fossil fuels, including the climate change that we're seeing that's disproportionately impacting the communities here. So, and then drawing a little bit on Melissa's presentation around the history of the policy making that has brought us to where we are, as well as her kind of call to action in terms of holding our elected officials accountable. There are some unique policies that are lacking in Mississippi that are existing in other places that I want to just kind of talk with you a little bit about through this Just Energy Policy Report. So, just an overview. So I'll give a sense of the purpose of the Just Energy Policy Report, what the policies will be focused on, give you a little bit of a sense of the national findings from the report, and then I'll talk very specifically about what's happening here in Mississippi, and then what some of the good things that are happening around the country that can be replicated here, and then just next steps in terms of the Just Energy Policy campaign that NAACP is working with. So the Just Energy Policy campaign aims are really to reduce pollution, as we were talking about before, and to, instead of having these polluting facilities and practices, to really stand for something positive for our communities, and that's energy efficiency that will reduce the amount of pollution that's coming from these facilities, but it will also save us money. One study from the Alliance to Save Energy talked about how an average family can save $1,000 a year by just putting in some energy efficiency measures into our homes. So, and then also included in that is to make sure that there's an equitable economic transition. Since we're really looking to shift from fossil fuel energy, and energy is a $1 trillion industry, and yet our communities are less likely to be able to be involved in the energy industry, and less likely to gain from the economic boon of the energy industry. The American Association of Blacks in Energy put out a report in 2009 that said that African Americans spend $40 billion on energy in 2009. There were only 1.1% of the jobs in the energy sector and less than 1% of the revenue from the energy sector. So it gives you a sense of the opportunity that there is for us to be involved there, and it gives you a sense of the fact that we are, this is one of the reasons why we tend to have the negative benefits in terms of having all the facilities that pollute in our communities, because we're not involved in the sector, we're not involved in the decision making around it. So that's why we as the NAACP really see energy as a civil rights issue, and why we decided to do this report. So the report is a 555-page report, and so we took it. Yeah, it took like 18 months to put together. It was a beast. But then we took it and we divided it into 51 state reports as well. So there's a specific report for Mississippi that's only like 20. So these are the policies that we focus on: renewable portfolio standards, energy efficiency standards, and net metering. Renewable portfolio standards is that some certain percentage of your energy needs to come from clean energy or renewable energy sources. Energy efficiency standards would say that utilities really need to focus on reducing the amount of electricity that's used every year. And net metering is, I've told you about in previous presentations, is when if you have a solar panel on your roof and you make more energy than you use, you can sell the excess energy back to the grid or back to the utility company or get credits on your next your next bill. And so I actually have a friend who's, when you look at his meter, it actually runs backwards because he's using less than he's generating from the solar panel. So basically broken a profit, and it's not making a profit, from the capital investment that he made. And so, like I said before, in addition to advancing these clean energy and energy efficiency policies, we want to make sure that as we advance these policies, that it is our communities that are host to facilities and so forth that are gaining from the transition to a new energy economy. So one of the policies we're advancing as part of this report is local hire provisions, making sure that there's a goal that says a certain percentage of people who are part of any development project are from the communities in which the projects are located. There aren't people coming in from outside reaping all the revenue from and getting all the jobs. And then the other thing is the minority business enterprise goal. It says that, because unfortunately, just like in everything else, so many of these industries get built and we're not really participating in them. So we want to make sure that there's actually written into policy a provision that says a certain percentage of contracts, procurements have to go to minority business enterprise owners. So the purpose of doing the 555-page report, I'll say that all the time, is because we really did want to equip NAACP units to understand, and other partners to really understand the energy sector, because this is one of the reasons why we're not involved, is because a lot of times we don't really understand it, and therefore we can't really be great advocates for ourselves. It seems very complicated, but once you really start to read through it, it's not as complicated as it seems, and we can really be effective advocates just by learning a little bit. So, without further ado, a little bit about the report findings. First, this is just kind of a review of our energy mix. It's actually changed a little bit. Now we're using about 30-something% of our electricity comes from coal, still around 25% from natural gas, 19% from nuclear, and 13%, although that's a little high from renewable energy, but that's in 2011. Just want to give a sense of where our data sources came from the report. And this is the database of state incentives for renewables and efficiency, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Energy Information Administration, and the good old EPA. So these are just some of the findings that we have. I'll just kind of go roughly through. So 29 states have mandatory renewable portfolio standards, and 9 states have voluntary renewable portfolio goals. 18 states have mandatory energy efficiency resource standards, and 8 states have voluntary standards. Net metering is about 46 states have them, 43 are mandatory, and 3 are voluntary. Only 9 states had local hire provisions that apply to the energy sector, and no states have minority business enterprise goals that apply specifically to the energy sector. So that's one of the things we're really advocating for. So here's the Mississippi situation. So Mississippi has no renewable portfolio standard, no energy efficiency resource standard, no net metering policy, no local hire provisions, and the minority business enterprise, you have a certification program for minority businesses, but it doesn't really, what we're looking for is training for minority businesses. We're looking for a funding set aside that says there's a carve out specifically for minority businesses, and then there's a formal notification process so that the minority businesses know when their contract or procurement opportunities are available. And Mississippi really just doesn't have any of those. So as Melissa was saying, we really need to be looking at what folks are doing who we've elected to represent our interests in government when all of this is happening and all of these things are disproportionately affecting low-income communities and communities of color. Mississippi does have, after the oil spill, they did have this first jobs bill, which is kind of a local hire provision, but it requires contractors for public works projects that receive funds related to federal disaster or major oil spills to consider first hires to be from Mississippi. So I just want to give a sense of what the energy landscape looks like in Mississippi. That red represents the amount of energy that comes from natural gas here. The green is from petroleum oil. The purple is from nuclear power. The darker blue is from coal, and the lighter blue is from renewable energy. So Mississippi, we talked before about how energy efficiency saves so much money in our bill. Mississippi had, in 2012, the unfortunate place of being ranked number 51 out of 51 states in terms of the energy efficiency scoring. Out of 50 possible points, Mississippi received 5.5 or 4 points, so that's not even, so that was unfortunate. However, the Public Utilities Commission saw this and took action, and in July of last year, they adopted rules requiring all gas and electric companies with more than 25,000 customers to begin offering energy efficiency programs within 6 months. So this is an important point because a lot of times people will make it sound like what they're doing is altruism for the community, or that they're doing it out of love for all of you. But in fact, a lot of times it's laws that are requiring people to take certain steps. So we've moved now up from 51 to 47 as a result of these new energy efficiency measures. And you've moved up to 50-point scale from 5.5 to 8. So that's progress. We only had 6 months to make some gains, but hopefully next year, we'll see some even better numbers. But on the positive note, that's the most movement that any state made in that year. So I mean, even though it was from the bottom to a couple of runs up, it was significant progress. But all it took was that requirement of the PUC. So it really does show the power of actually having laws that work for you. So that's inspiring. So Mississippi just has a lot of potential in terms of what we're talking about in terms of moving to clean energy. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory has found that from what PV stands for photovoltaic, which just basically means solar energy. So they found that the urban utility scale solar potential was 48% total net generation, basically the amount of energy that you need. You could actually get it from solar energy at utility scale, solar energy. Rural, over 100% solar energy potential for Mississippi. And rooftop potential, meaning like if you got it on your home, about 34% of your energy needs can be covered by solar energy potential. And Mississippi has great offshore wind. People always say that Mississippi has no wind potential, but you've got great offshore wind potential. Again, over 100% of the energy needs that you have for the state. And then geothermal, which means that you can either heat or cool your home with these systems. You can, again, get over 100% of your heating and cooling needs from geothermal energy. So a lot of times when there's a reference to keeping the lights on and so forth, and a lot of times these are the arguments that are used by utility companies that say, we have to continue burning coal or burning oil or all these negative practices, and then they'll kind of make it sound like, don't you want to have the lights on, as opposed to as if it's a choice between having the lights on or kind of suffering from these debilitating illnesses that result from these fossil fuel energy uses. And so we really need to be pushing for these clean energy choices and for energy efficiency that we know will save us money and maintain our health. So just in terms of what we're recommending is obviously that Mississippi adopts all these policies, a renewable portfolio standard, and energy efficiency standard, net metering policies, local higher provisions, and minority and black enterprise provisions. Some of the places that have already done exciting things are Minnesota, which has put in place a law that says that public utilities have to enter into a 20-year power purchasing agreement with community-owned renewable energy, so that people are actually owning their own energy. So you and your community can actually be owning your own energy. And it also says that no one owner can own over 15% of a project. So it really puts in place, it really legislates kind of a collective ownership model. So you're all gaining from the revenue. You're also all part of the active decision making. And so these are the kind of models that we could really be looking at for Mississippians as well. So in places like in Maryland and Cleveland, they have community-owned solar as well. And then we in Maryland actually got together with other organizations, and we negotiated with these various utility companies. We were able to get all of our electricity as the NAACP. Our headquarters spends $10,000 a month on electricity alone. And we were able to get in with all these other groups, negotiate with the energy companies, and now we're saving 14% on our energy bills, which works out to about $1,400 a month. And we are getting all of our energy from renewable energy certificates from local and national wind only. So it's possible to do these things with some, creativity. And so just to wrap up, our next steps with our plan is to release the 51 individual state reports. We already have the master report up on our website. We're putting out a Just Energy Policy action toolkit so that different states know how to advocate for these different policies. We'll be doing trainings and strategy sessions in different states that want to take on these policies. And then we also want to do Bridging the Gap sessions. We did a Bridging the Gap seminar last year where all these different green companies, community groups, banks, and foundations came together and talked about ways that Black communities can get connected to the green economy with jobs, with starting community-owned solar projects, with starting green projects as entrepreneurs, etc. So we're trying to get all the states to do the same thing so you can really understand how you can locally connect to the green economy as consumers and as business folks. So that wraps me up. Thank you very much.
It's so great, I think, that the NAACP is devoted to do these reports and get this information out there, because it empowers communities so much to have this kind of information. Everyone, our last speaker tonight, before we go to some questions, is the president of our Gulfport NAACP, Ms. Bruce Story, and she's going to talk about meetings with public officials. Ms. Story?
My cousin's husband works for the board with Boy Scouts. He collects canyons, so please don't throw yours in the trash. I'll have to go in there and dig them out, because I get them for him. So, just be prepared. I'll do all the work. Okay. I just want to tell you that Tuesday, there was a shock to me. We went to Jackson, Miss Eglin and I. I'm her chauffeur. I'll tell y'all that now. Wherever she wants to go, Ruth has to drive. So, since this was one on our goal of talking with the public service commissioners, and we got there, and we went into this room, thinking it was a big meeting that we were going to do, and we were met with all of this. And I'm assuming everybody in there was somebody dealing with this. I didn't have any idea. But as I began to look at it, I found city power all over the place. And I didn't know all of this stuff. So I wanted to question it, and maybe you are interested too. You know, and some of this stuff was filed, and this is what's so amazing to me. It isn't this year. This one was filed back in May. Oh. And this is a notice of Mississippi Power Company of intent to establish a direct load control demand side management program. I bet you know what that is, don't you? I have no idea. But most of this stuff is something's ongoing. It says continue. Filed on 8/28/09. Notice of Mississippi Power Company of intent to establish a residential critical peak pricing pilot demand side management program.
What's the date on that?
8/28/09. But most of this, and it's just not Mississippi Power. I'm doing Mississippi Power because that's who we're talking about, Plant Jack Watson. There's all kinds, but most of them are, it's a whole list of stuff that's going on that you and I have no idea of what's going on, of what's affecting us, or how it will affect us. And, it's sort of like she said, we don't know until it hits us. And then we say, what can we do? Nothing, because it's too late then. It's too late. I didn't just get one package, and I can't even go through this one. This one's just filled with stuff. But we did talk to our public service commissioner, met with him, who is Mr. Renfro from Moss Point. How many of you know Mr. Renfro? You do, Howard, okay. We met with Mr. Renfro, and we were kind of concerned. We wanted to know, for one thing, we want improvements from Plant Jack Watson, but we were of the impression that if we had some improvements, all of those profits that Plant Jack Watson, Mississippi Power gets, Southern Company gets, then maybe they would pay for some of that. No way. The ratepayers will do all the paying. Any improvements that's made will be paid for by you and me. Anybody using Mississippi Power. Their profits go to their shareholders. And all of these, and I'm looking at some of their shareholders. Their retired employees are part of their shareholders. No, their profits are not used to improve anything. I understand that the plant over in Escataba got some scrubbers. Now, I don't know what scrubbers are, but it's for improving the plant. The plant Jack Watson didn't get any scrubbers. We're probably too old for scrubbers.
We don't have the land.
And we don't have the land.
We don't have enough land at Jack Watson to put in scrubbers.
Okay.
Big, long buildings. They put the polluted area, they put it through this process, and when it comes out the other end, it's supposed to be less dirty.
So we get to keep the dirt. Okay. We did talk with him. In fact, we talked with the executive supervisor also. And it was very interesting, but it was aggravating because there was nothing that could be done. You know, I listened and we tried talking, and Catherine was real good at that. And she was trying to tell him how the profits would be from Mississippi Power could be better used. You know, he listened and he said, you know, the commissioners don't have that power. They have power, but it is to regulate only. There's any power to help to give us any better success because of their money. If there's anything going to be done to improve the air, it's going to be because we pay for it. They can do it, but we will pay for it. But I don't mind. I like to have clean air, but I don't know. I don't know how many people can afford it. As I told them at the last meeting I went to, that the elderly people in Mississippi cannot pay anymore. They just can't afford it. And it becomes a question of whether I'm going to eat, because they don't get any food stamps, trust me. About $15 a month. I don't know anybody can eat on $15 a month and live. So, you know, but they do the job. We talked about improvements for Mississippi Power. We talked about the responsibilities of the public service commissioners, the possibility of upgrades. We had very good conversation, but nothing could be accomplished. Not really. You know, it's good. At least we learned. And it's good to know, because you do need information. Information is power. And I want to tell you, ignorance is not bliss, people. So we don't want to do that. We want to know. We want to know. Even if we can't stop it, even if we can't change it, we want them to know that we're not happy when things are not being done correctly for us. Okay. So that's my talk about the commissioners. And I'm going to tell you this. There was nobody there that didn't belong there to try to take care of this except Catherine and me. Everybody else had something to do with getting some of this passed. There were no citizens watching to see what was going on, no citizens there, and maybe we need to be there. And if you'd like to take a ride up there, they meet once a month, I think. They don't meet often, but when you go, you'll get your package too. Sorry. But anyway, I hope you learned a lot tonight, and we have to keep on. We just can't stop. So next time, invite more people. Invite your friends so we can have an overflowing room, and we won't have enough to fill. Okay. Thank you.
Before we go to question, I'd just like to recognize two more people who accompanied Melissa from Jackson from MDEQ. One is a contractor, but she started with MDEQ, and she's been a great friend of work that we do. Gloria Tatum, who came down from Jackson. And this gentleman is Dallas Baker, and he is the director of the Environmental Permits Division. Which is,
Amen. Good to have you.
And, you know, the permits is where you can kind of solve problems before they happen. Once something's permitted, that's a whole nother animal. And so if I could take one little point of privilege, I was going to start the questions by asking Mr. Baker a question, and everyone, I'd like to think that we could ask you, anyone would like to ask you a question too about permitting. So as my understanding is that executive order about environmental justice that we've heard mentioned here, it requires that on big federal permits that there's a consideration of environmental justice. And I was just going to ask you, when you see a permit like an air quality permit, and people at a meeting said they have concerns about environmental justice, that this is disproportionately affecting a minority neighborhood, and they'd like you to consider it. How would you, as a director of permits, how would you look at those kind of comments and consider those kind of comments?
That's a great question. The Environmental Permits Division, a number of years ago, we instituted a tool we called the Project Awareness Checklist. Okay, so any application that comes in that requires our permit board to make a decision to issue, to modify, to revoke, or whatever the permit action is, we have a checklist, and it causes every engineer, such as me, to go through a series of questions. Like, for example, has this area been identified as a minority-sensitive area or an economically stressed area? And some of these we've discussed today. It was a great presentation with Max showing a history of how you can really quickly delineate demographics of minorities and poverty, etc. So it does cause us to identify yes or no, do we believe it to be an impacted, socially sensitive area. Also, we look at, well, what is the history of the water quality in the area? What is the history of what we know about the air quality of the area? And it is a tool that didn't exist about 10 years ago. We thought we've got to do a better job consistently. So every engineer now has to go through this thought process. If the answer is yes to some of these questions, then we respond by picking up the phone, maybe get Melissa involved, get our compliance officers involved. And as you know, we have a public participation element to almost every kind of permit action. So we go to public comment for most of our environmental permits that are requested of us. So we go online, we have notices in the newspaper, the courthouse, the library, etc. And it's open for, usually it's 30 days. We also, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes not for the majors, we go to our friends in Atlanta at the Environmental Protection Agency, so they have a chance to make sure that our permit is sound and compliant with all state and federal regulations. And according to that plan that you mentioned, we have it's called a state implementation plan that Mississippi constantly is working on depending on things and events. So EJ is kind of in the culture of the Environmental Permits Division. Really, thanks to Melissa and the work with EPA, we have periodic meetings where suddenly I'm learning this, that our engineers, as they come in, they know and are trained to look for things. So we've come a long way, I think, in Jackson to think of these things. So it's part of our systematic process.
Okay, thank you, Dallas. I agree. I do think MEQ really has come a long way by creating the office that Melissa, operates. By acknowledging environmental justice. Of course, the federal government started with that. And I would like to quickly add that, President Obama has really reinvigorated since he came into office. And Denise could tell you a lot about that I think that's really helped because we've all been aware and we've worked on environmental justice, but when his administration gave a lot more energy to EPA, that then allowed more energy to go to the state agencies, and so we're seeing some great fruits of all that work. So it's this.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank them for coming because all too often our community seems left out and ignored, and we really appreciate the fact that you took the time to come down and address us and be with us this evening. Thank you so very much.
So
I also just wanted to follow up about the meeting with the elected officials, because I don't want anybody to leave here feeling defeated. I'm sorry, I don't accept that there is nothing you can do and that we're powerless and we're hopeless. That is not the case. That we're going to fight and we're going to fight. The only thing that I left there with the resolve is that we need to look more now than ever to the EPA and to what President Obama is doing, because there's no, I just do not accept the fact, I do not accept it as fact that we have to make a choice between breathing clean air and paying our utility bills. That's, I don't buy it. So that's why we're here, and we will keep brainstorming. We'll probably have a letter writing campaign to the Commissioner Renfro. The good thing about that is, at least we know that Commissioner Renfro is a lot more open than what we had before his time. So that probably was very attentive and very, his door was open, his ears were open. So we're not going to accept that. And I had a question on the Clean Air Act. I think was that, Janine, was that you that talked about section 111B? Okay, and the mercury air toxic standard. And I think you were mentioning some of the existing plants, and in our other first town hall meeting, this situation came up, and we asked a question, and even though the word grandfather in was used, it was very clear, and someone said no, they've never heard of it, that the existing power plant, and in this case, Plant Watson, operates under the same guidelines and have the same regulations as the new plants that are operating. And I really need some clarity on that, because that, I think, especially the people who were at that particular meeting.
With regard to the mercury and air toxic rule, is specifically, that will apply to all existing power plants that are over the limit set in the rule, which is 25 megawatts.
Okay.
And there's a time frame, though, for them to come into compliance. In other words, the rule went into effect, and they had a certain amount of time to put in place the mechanical processes, or to change their fuel, or whatever they need to do to come in under the standards that are set. And I believe the first compliance date is March of 2015. I'm looking to the permitting people here, but I believe it's March of 2015. They can get a year extension from the state if they can demonstrate the necessity, and that's a state decision. And then there is a policy in place of the federal government to consider an additional year extension. The states cannot grant that extension. It has to be EPA. And we will grant that extension if they demonstrate that they need additional time in order to ensure reliability of the power sector.
Well, that's not basic. It's not just the mercury air toxic standard. It's just in general, because I do know that at one point when an improvement was made at Plant Watson, EPA took Mississippi Power Company to court, because that would have triggered a back. And
Your new source review.
okay, okay. And I guess the concern is, I'm assuming that the newer plants are already, they have the best available control technology. The newer plants already are required to have this.
It depends on the plant.
Yeah, okay.
It really is a site by site and analysis.
She's not going to say it political. It's basically what it is.
Well, no, it really does depend, because it depends on what they did at that plant. Because if they made changes, if it's an older plant and they made changes, then the new source review applies, and they have to include best available control technology. If it's an older plant and they haven't made any changes, then the only thing that's going to apply is the mercury and air toxic standard. And that's the dates are coming. So it depends. I'm not
No,
trying.
but I'm
really
just
trying
saying.
to answer.
Oh, I know it.
And
I
so
know
if
it's
it
side
was
by side. I know that.
constructed, if it was a new plant constructed after the rules were in place, then it must comply with those rules that are in place.
But that's the question right there, okay? That older plants do not have to have those, you know, that's what I'm saying there. I think that they kept saying that they had the same compliance as the newer plants. And if they fought it and it was dismissed because of lack of jurisdiction, because EPA filed for this in Atlanta.
Yes.
Okay, so I've been trying to find out why wasn't it pursued in the court of proper jurisdiction?
Yes, ma'am.
And I'd like to know what MDEQ's position was on that. Because that in and of itself would have enabled us to have cleaner air if that had been employed, but it was only dismissed because of lack of jurisdiction because it was filed in Georgia.
You are correct. We filed an action against Southern Company, which included a number of subsidiaries, which we maintained to be subsidiaries. They bought that, and we lost in that court, and those cases were dismissed, is my understanding. With regard to the pendency of all of those cases, as you probably well know, some of those cases were refiled in certain jurisdictions, but there was not a case filed here in Mississippi. And as far as what the status of that case is, because that matter is still a pending matter for EPA, I can't really comment on that at this point.
Well, we are, I guess we are concerned, and that's why we want you here to hear our concerns, because that's why I say I didn't feel good when I talked to Commissioner Renfro, because if EPA felt strongly enough that they did make some upgrades that would warrant the trip of the ban, then I really would hope that EPA as well as MDEQ would pursue this, you know, in the proper jurisdiction, because it was only dismissed because of lack of, because of lack of jurisdiction in the Georgia court. So, I mean, you kind of answered and cleared up some of the confusion, because even though the word grandfathered in was used, and then there was a lot of denial that Plant Watson had been grandfathered in, and wasn't required. There were certain that they didn't have to meet certain requirements. So you're saying that basically they would have to meet just the mercury air toxic.
My understanding, based on the age, and you probably know more than I do the age of the plant, but my understanding, based on the age of the plant, that the rule that would be applied to it right now is the mercury and air toxic standards. But if they've made modifications, then the new source review would apply. If there's a.
Could I quickly ask a quick question on that? Was there a time, perhaps during the Bush administration, where there were some improvements to lots of power plants where new source review was not triggered, where there was some kind of a waiver or something given, where it was my understanding that in between 2000 and 2005 there were some improvements made, and somehow there were some allowances by that administration. That, are you aware of any time that maybe there were some times where new source review, where a plant could improve the plant and then not come up to best available technology?
As far as I know, the overall basic rules of the new source review program did not change through the 2000s, even to this day. There were some nuances with a thing called plant-wide applicability limits, and that turned out not to be as popular, and those rule changes. But basically, no, sir, there was none. One key date, the PSD program, if I'm not mistaken, if it was built prior to 1977, then those were prior to the PSD rules. I believe that's true. Plant Watson.
It's 67, and actually the first permit's like 59. The very first permit's like 59. It's 67.
No, that's when PSD kicked in. That was became a major source program. since then, you're right, any change, modification, you look at what's the effect of the emissions, and if the rules are such that if that effect is below a de minimis level, then you, in effect, get out of, that's true nationwide, having to apply back to technology. Minor little sources, little increases and changes, perhaps, but anything significant.
But what was the significance of plants built before the 1977? What is there?
That was when the PSD rules.
I know, but the ones who were built before that time.
So the way most environmental statutes work is that if there is a plant or a facility that is in existence at the time the statute is passed, initially passed, those plants, they can either be grandfathered in to compliance, and that means they're basically allowed to operate as they currently existed at the time, or if the statute doesn't specifically have language that applies to them, that requires them to do something, then that's the way our statutes generally work. I can give you another example. Back in the 80s, under the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, there was a new rule that came in for surface impoundments. So those surface impoundments were allowed to remain in place as they were if they were already in existence. And I think that's what we're talking about here, is if it was in existence when the rule came into place, then the rule impacted it only if they made the change.
Okay, and that's what I was trying to get at, because we were told that they were not grandfathered in to anything, and that was the first time ever hearing the word grandfathered in.
Okay.
And so we just want the question answered.
I can't tell you, I can only tell you what I know, and what I know is that you were right, that we filed a case against Southern Company. There was a count included on Plant Jack Watson. When we refiled cases, we have not taken an action on Plant Jack Watson.
So, is it pending? What?
I can't really comment on that.
Okay.
Kathy,
Yes.
Jack Watson does not have the land area to put in scrubbers, and they have agreed to go to natural gas only in the next few years and not use coal. Victor Daniel over in Gaucher, they have a big land area. It's a much newer plant. It's got a big land area, and they've got a lot of room, a lot of land, and they can put in those long buildings where they have to build those scrubbers. Jack Watson just doesn't have it. So what they have said that they will do is become a natural gas plant only and a peak plant, meaning when demands for electricity are at their peak, when they're really high, they'll use it to supplement. Is what they said that they will do. But something you said earlier about there's only a few of us and can we win, and does it make a difference? It makes every difference. 4 years ago, where is Kenneth? Is he still here? All right, I was talking to Kenneth Casey after a City Hall meeting. It might have been a little more than 4 years ago. And George Slogan came up to me and said, he did this, y'all, I'm not kidding. Now, little lady, you don't worry about that power plant they're going to build up in Kimball County. Little lady, you just don't understand how it's going to work. Now, little lady, and I just smiled and I said, okay. But I made my decision that day. I was going to, because I had already seen how much it was going to cost and what the financial mechanism was, and I already knew they'd been turned down by every major industrial financial institution on the East Coast, where they all go to get their money for these big deals. And if they were turned down, there was a reason for it. And I found out the reason for it. They didn't think it would work. Those big financial institutions, they have their own engineers. They looked at the technology and it didn't look good to them. So I kept studying more and more. And then I started working to make it where we would not have to pay for that plant. At first I said, if the power company wants to build it, fine. That's fine. If they want to build it, they get cost plus 12% to build it. Their stockholders get all the dividends. Let them pay for it. But little by little, opposing them, going to court, doing all these things, we have won every battle we've been in with them. And there's a big difference between what the power company says in the newspaper and what they say in court. There are things, we can say anything we want to in court. They absolutely will not challenge us on things that we say in court, because if they do, they have to give up, they have to prove it by allowing us to see the records that they don't want us to see, what they call proprietary business practices. So when they say, at first they said, oh, it's not going to cost anywhere near what Ms. St. Martin says it's going to cost. We're going to build this for less than $2.44 billion. But in court, they wouldn't say that. In court, they've never said that. They only say it at a press conference. Because when you say it in court, you're under oath. And if you say it at the Public Service Commission, you are also under oath. Speaking of the Public Service Commission, you know they have offices down here on the coast. At least Renfro has offices down here. We can all go for a little visit over there to his office. We can visit him locally. We don't have to drive, up to Jackson. And it would be good to visit him sometime. We're a friendly community. We like visiting one another. We could go visit our Public Service Commission.
Okay.
Put it on our calendar.
That's right. You set the date, Jackie. And we'll go visit. Kathy's going to set the date for our visit with Mr. Renfro.
Well, thanks. And everybody, I'm going to see if we have one more question before we ask Mr. Crowell to do some closing remarks. Well, we have two. I'm going to ask Ms. Leddy too, of course.
Ms. Patterson, you were speaking about the solar panels and energy. Do you have a contact or information that you can pass on? I'll see you.
And Ms. Leddy, with our final question.
Okay, I just want to make a comment, and I'm going to do it because you have permitted, you representing here, and this is on the local level. It has to do with what Ms. Collier said, and that is getting people to do, the average person, first of all, they don't have any faith in the system, and for that reason, they're not watching for a permit. And then some people who do find one, might forget it. But I can remember when we first started trying to get stuff done, we actually had to go door to door, copy a permit, or interpret the permit, and go door to door and get. I'm just saying that to make the system work, all citizens need to stand up and be counted, and that's hard. If you don't have a computer, you're not going to see it. Okay. If you don't go to the library, you're not going to see it. And if you don't if you got a tight budget, you don't get the paper. So, I'm sure you get sometimes, and sometimes I get them and forget to fill them out. So I'm saying to us here, we have to get on each other. Like I miss it now because I can't go door to door like I used to. And I know a lot's going lacking.
And you have done a lot of work over the years, like a lot of folks here.
Yeah, and I'm not just speaking for me. I'm just saying that that's a principle.
Oh, yes, ma'am. And that is, I think, one of the great benefits of this community is folks have known each other for a long time, and they do work as a community.
And the Milwaukee,
it's why the Turkey Creek is recognized by the EPA as a priority watershed.
Yeah, but I'm talking about us right here in this neighborhood need to be sure that people somehow make them alert. Now, what my Derek used to do when he first came home, he copy them and put them in an envelope and send them days ago. Because that's how important it was. Of course we learned out we couldn't afford to keep doing that. But I just don't want to take up a lot of time here because that's not going to help either. I'm just saying somebody in your community needs to get out and do some legwork and remind folks.
So thank you, and everyone, we now have Mr. James Crowell, and he's going to give our closing remarks. And certainly thanks to all the great speakers that we've had, but this is Mr. Crowell.
Well, we want to thank Jackie for coming down from our national and the other people from MDQ and EPA for coming and giving us a speech. And I've learned something tonight. I hope that you have about your environment. And one of the things that we have done here in Mississippi at the state office, even though they're building that plant in Kemper County, was to make sure that some of our people did get some of those jobs that live in Kemper County. And that they also benefited from some of the money that will come to that plant by training some of those young people coming out of high school, sending them to several of the universities so that they will be eligible for some of the jobs when they get there. But that doesn't eliminate the environmental issues that they have with the plant. But the fact that we are making sure that some of the things that Jackie was talking about that the NAACP wants to see happen were taking place. And we thank you all for taking out the time to come out and be out tonight. And I want to thank Kathy, and she's our committee chair for the environment up in our national office. She's a board member also, along with myself. And so she does some great work, and she works hard at this. And I know her sister here used to be work for the MDEQ. I never forget after Katrina, she drove down. I had to ride around with her to show her all of some of the problems that we were having at that time. But we want to thank you all for coming out and being a part of this program tonight. Thank you so much.
Excuse me, may I take a point of personal privilege? Because he said, this is Gloria's sister. We don't talk about this. I mean, when Gloria and I are together, I reckon Gloria's retired. So I'm still waiting for an explanation of why she So I don't usually, people, I think it's just come up because I usually don't ever volunteer because I'm afraid I'll embarrass her. Because Gloria used to work in the lab when she first started working for it was called pollution control. I was so impressed with everything she was doing. Didn't understand a bit of it, but I knew it was very important. It was way out of my pay grade. And she had no idea what an influence she was on me in the respect that I have for the environment, which is why they tapped me for years. But she is definitely the expert in all of this. And so I do look up to her, and I have looked up to her for years, but I thought she was all retired.
I'm retired. I didn't die. Somebody like Melissa Collier to have a staff to come out and go around the state of Mississippi. EJ would never get the respect that it deserved. We didn't get it when I was the EJ coordinator. It's not there that Melissa is the coordinator until we get a line item budget. And also, when you find a problem, what do? Where's the funding to take care of that? EJ will always be a second thought process until we get there. And legislation is very critical, and then it should be handed down to the state just like any other program. You're right. So that's what we need to work on from communities. That's what we need to work on.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
This is my goddaughter.
This is my godmother. I am here with family. Hello, I'm Jerica Washington. I am here with family. It's so nice and an honor to be here.
From Alaska.
I am with the Air Force, so that's why I'm in Alaska. Everybody said you thought I was 13, right? Okay. I'm 22, and I'll say that out loud so the cameras have it rolling. Thank you so much. I learned a lot today. I'm representing the youth that are still existing today that stay long at the meeting and want to fight for a difference and progress. I learned a lot about the environment. I learned a lot about the paperwork and the people that care. Thank you to Ruth. That presentation was very educational. Thank you for the information about the EPA. I did not know we were representing such a large, influential company. And then, of course, I'm not going to remember everyone's names and faces, but thank you. I appreciate being here, and I do represent the youth. And I'm going to take this back to youth I know me. You could be hearing from me through my godmother. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody has to eat.